Alright, I am back once again, and I have my Nikon SP right here, a camera everyone should be pretty familiar with at this point, but this time I'm not going to talk about the camera so much as the lenses. So this right here is the 28mm f3.5 lens, and this is a lens I've had for about a year and a half, I guess, and I've used it quite a bit, and it's one of my favorite Nikon lenses so far, especially for this old S mount. I also have the corresponding viewfinder, which is irritatingly rare and hard to find. The lenses are pretty common, but the viewfinders are kind of hard to find, but I'll come back to that in a little bit. So I'm going to do some videos that talk more about these lenses than the cameras, and I think I'm going to go from widest to longest. So I'm starting off with the 28, which is the widest lens I own. There is a 25mm f4 and a 21mm f4 that were made for the Nikon S mount, but they're very rare, and they're especially the 21mm is very expensive, so I don't have them. And honestly, I'm not sure I would get them. I think those focal lengths are wide enough that I wouldn't have much use for them. 28 is really good enough for pretty much everything I do. So as for the lens, it has some interesting construction. The aperture is actually controlled by the sort of outer rim right here, which actually has the threading for filters. And I find that kind of interesting because you don't see too many lenses built like that. And it is an odd thing. When you see it, it seems a little weird because you have to kind of look at the front of the lens to set the aperture, which can be, it's kind of awkward at first, but it is an interesting design feature because it does make the lens pretty small, and once you get used to it, I don't really have any complaints about it. It is a bit weird that sometimes you want to change your aperture and you have to kind of like turn the camera around and look at it. It's a bit weird, but at the same time, when I'm shooting these on old film cameras, I'm usually not in a huge hurry, so it's not that big of an inconvenience. I'm sure some people will hate that. I find it kind of an interesting little quirk. Another interesting thing to note about these lenses, as I mentioned before, some of them are not very forgiving with the focus, but this one you can kind of see, even at f3.5, its fastest aperture, you get a pretty broad field of focus. And if you follow the lines around, the markings for zone focusing, they end at f16, but that encompasses most of the lens's circumference, I guess, most of the focusing area. So theoretically, if you have this opened up to f22, you really don't even need to focus. I say open, I guess it's closed f22, you don't really need to focus at all. And even at f16, you really arguably don't need to focus. And I find that very interesting because you can use this lens in a very quick, sort of off-the-hip manner because it's wide. Pretty much everything's going to be in focus if you're shooting more closed down around f16 or f22, so you don't have to be super exacting with it, which is kind of interesting. And I think it would be a very good lens for street photography, and I'm kind of surprised more people don't use these setups for street photography. But then again, I don't really understand much about the street photography world. They seem to be all caught up in their own strange little rules and stuff. But so far I've liked this lens. I will post some photos at the end of this video that were taken with this lens, and I believe all the photos I'm going to post were shot on my Nikon S4, not the SP, with the 28mm lens using the 28mm viewfinder, and I think they were all shot on ultrafine extreme 400 film that I developed at home, if anybody wants to know about the film. Which is another point. Some people have asked about chromatic aberration with these lenses, and I can't really speak much on that because I pretty much always use them with black and white film, so I haven't seen any, but it could be there. Another thing is a lot of people get concerned with things like sharpness, corner sharpness, and vignetting, and I think this is a very sharp lens overall. I say that knowing that I normally shoot it at like f5.6 or a little bit more closed down than that. At 3.5, 4, it's still pretty usable. It's probably not going to be super sharp, especially by modern standards, but it will be good. I think it'll easily be on par with any sort of Leica lens or any other lens from the time frame, or even a little bit later. What else? When it comes to corner sharpness, when it was shot on a Nikon camera, the corners seem sharp. They don't seem to have any vignetting, but when I have transferred this lens over to my Sony A7 with the adapter, I have noticed there is definitely some vignetting, but I think a lot of that speaks more to the fact that I'm using a very cheap adapter that was, I think the adapter I have is made from an old Soviet camera, and you actually have to kind of mount the lenses upside down, and it's not the highest quality adapter. I got it off eBay very cheap, so I think a lot of the flaws I've seen come more from the adapter than from the actual lens, but I can't say with absolute certainty. I don't really know what else to say about this lens. I really like this lens, and I would say it's probably one of my favorites in the overall lineup. It's easy to use, which I know sounds kind of lazy or dumb, but it's just very easy to use. Like I said, you don't really have to worry too much about the focus. It's very wide. It's very compact. I mean, you can see if I mount this without the viewfinder here, and especially if I take off the case, you can pretty much fit this in a jacket pocket or something. So it's very easy to carry around. I mean, it's not that thick. It is a little heavy. Everything's all chrome plated and brass, so it is a little bit heavy, but it's not too bad compared to a lot of other cameras. It's hard to know what else to say. I think my other big thing would be the viewfinders. You might remember in my other videos I mentioned that the SP does have this wide-angle viewfinder over here, and if you use the totality of the viewfinder, it's supposedly 28mm. And I noted before that I said, you know, I've compared it to the Nikon viewfinder, and I think the Nikon viewfinder is a little bit more accurate because it seems like this built-in finder is set to basically the close focusing, because with these little adapters you actually have to kind of select your range, and it moves the viewfinder up and down a little bit as sort of a parallax correction. And I believe that the built-in viewfinder is basically set to the minimum parallax of about 3 feet, which is fine for some people, but if you want to do landscape stuff and you're going to be shooting at infinity or pretty close to it, you'll probably see that it crops off a little bit at the top and it's not super accurate. So I do generally shoot this lens with this viewfinder. I generally shoot it on something more like the S4 or the S3. I just put it on the SP today because I don't know, I just like the look of the SP. I think it's a beautiful camera. I have shot it a few times with the built-in viewfinder. I have a roll somewhere. I was trying to find the scans and I didn't know where they were off the top of my head. But I did shoot an entire roll with this lens, the 28mm on the SP, using the built-in viewfinder, and I got pretty good results. I don't think anything was really off. So you can use this viewfinder, but I am going to do a little something. I'm going to post a picture right about now, and you'll see there are 2 black Nikon SPs. And these were provided by a Facebook user who goes by the name of Lindy Snapper. I'm not sure that's his real name, but he's a pretty prolific Nikon collector. And you'll see in this photo he has 2 black Nikon SPs, and both of them have 28mm lenses. And the interesting thing about this is he claims that he bought both of these from essentially the original users, or the estates of the original users. And the one on the right is a camera that belonged to, I believe it was a Japanese women's magazine, and the one on the left belonged to an American photojournalist. And I find it very interesting that he bought these cameras like this, and both of them had the 28mm f3.5 lens fitted as the default lens, which kind of suggests that was the favored lens of both of these professional photographers. And you'll note that both of them have an external viewfinder. The Japanese one has the Nikon-made viewfinder, which is a tunnel viewfinder, by the way. It just shows a rough frame line of what you'll see. The other one from the American user has a Leica viewfinder, which is a bright line viewfinder, so it gives you a wider field of view than it has sort of like lines etched into where the 28mm lens would roughly be shooting, and it usually has some sort of brackets or notches for parallax correction. And I think it's very interesting that both of these professional photographers, who apparently use these cameras for a long time, favored that 28mm lens. And also, they didn't trust that internal finder. They went and they bought an external finder and apparently used it quite a bit because they were bound to the cameras when they were resold and purchased. And I find that very interesting. I think that speaks a lot on the, I guess in a lot of ways on the professionalism of the shooters, but also on the fact that this internal viewfinder probably isn't the most reliable at 28mm for the 28mm lens. Is this really conclusive evidence? No. But at the same time, it is something I think is very interesting and kind of noteworthy. Another thing is, if you look at those cameras again, both of them are black, and they obviously were heavily used, and they have a lot of brassing, and that strikes me because I think they're beautiful. I know some people would say they look a little ugly, but I think they look great. And that kind of strikes me because, as you probably remember, I have a black Nikon SP, Special Edition 2005, I want to be specific. And I'm sometimes kind of hesitant to use it because it was an expensive camera and it's in great shape. But when I see that brassing on those black SPs, it's so beautiful, and I kind of want to really just take my SP out and use it everywhere and carry it around and wear it out and get some brassing like that on it. I'm not sure I'll do that, but like I said, I think that has kind of inspired me to take the SP out a little bit more and not be too worried about getting it a little scuffed and scratched and showing a little bit of brass, because I look at those cameras and I think, God, those are just beautiful. I could even do pretty much the same setup. I could fit the 28 in a viewfinder. I think I'd keep the 35 on there because it's probably a more versatile lens in a lot of ways. It's a lot faster. But that's my first video on lenses with the Nikon 28mm f3.5 and its corresponding viewfinder. So hopefully this helps somebody out there who's considering buying one of these lenses, or perhaps has one of these cameras and one of these lenses and has been hesitant to use it. So stay tuned, and I'll include some photos taken with this lens and the viewfinder, but on a different camera.